Welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we think about having absolute power, we picture this sort of universal master key.
Right, like a literal key to the universe.
Exactly. You have limitless wealth, unquestioned authority, and so you just walk through life expecting that every single door you encounter will just, naturally click open for you. You want something, you insert the key, the tumblers align perfectly, and the door swings wide.
Because it creates a deeply ingrained cognitive bias. I mean, when your environment constantly bends to your will, you develop a very linear, predictable, and ultimately comfortable way of experiencing reality.
Yeah, it's a completely frictionless existence.
Right. Cause and effect become entirely dictated by your resources.
But the friction is exactly where things get real.
Yeah.
Because eventually you step out of the realm of material transactions and into the incredibly messy, unpredictable world of, well, human psychology and spiritual affliction.
Oh, absolutely.
Suddenly, you find yourself staring down a door that doesn't even have a keyhole. You're holding this ultimate master key of immense wealth and total earthly power. And the terrifying realization sets in. Your key is fundamentally mechanically useless here.
Which forces a profound psychological crisis.
Right.
When the tool you've used to solve every problem in your entire life suddenly fails, you don't just lose the object you were trying to acquire, you lose your fundamental understanding of how the universe operates.
And that absolute collapse of the material worldview is exactly where our source material drops us today.
It's a fantastic starting point.
It really is. We're exploring a story that, on the surface, might sound familiar, but it rapidly morphs into something far more intricate. We're pulling from the first book of Rumi Masnavi, specifically an adaptation titled A King in Love with a Servant Girl.
And that's authored by Dr. Mani and Dr. Nozin, right?
Yes, exactly, from their series Rumi's Tales and Wisdom.
It's a remarkable piece of literature precisely because it plays with your cultural conditioning.
Oh, it completely weaponizes it, because you read that title, A King in Love with a Servant Girl, and your brain immediately cues up the Disney-fied fairy tale template.
You expect the classic tropes.
Yeah, you prepare yourself for a story about a prince charming sweeping a lowly peasant off her feet, like a triumph of romance over social class. But let me warn you right now, this text abandons that script almost immediately.
It really does.
It devolves, or maybe evolves is the better word, into a dark, psychologically complex thriller. We are going to be unpacking sudden, inexplicable wasting diseases, divine intervention that looks a lot like a premeditated assassination.
Which is wild to think about.
So wild. Plus poison medicine and the unsparing, systematic deconstruction of superficial love.
What's fascinating here is we need to look at this not merely as an ancient fable, but as a sophisticated clinical examination of human desire.
I like that. A clinical examination.
Right. This text is testing the absolute limits of material power and challenging us to understand the mechanical difference between treating the symptom of a problem and actually curing the root cause of a malady.
Okay, so let's get right into the mechanics of this. The story opens with a king who is outside his city, out on a hunt.
Dead in the scene.
Exactly. And the text provided by Dr. Amani and Dr. Nozin makes a point to mention that he is accompanied by his attendants. I think that setting is crucial. He's in his absolute element of dominance.
He's the apex predator in the forest.
Right. Surrounded by an entourage whose sole purpose is to facilitate his desires. He's the center of his universe. And while in this state of total control, he spots a beautiful servant girl. The text says he falls deeply in love with her instantly.
Well, we have to interrogate the word love in that context.
Yeah, for sure.
What he's experiencing is the instantaneous crystallization of desire.
Exactly. He sees her, he wants her, and he's determined to win her over. So, how does an apex predator with unlimited resources hunt for affection?
He uses the only tool in his arsenal.
His immense wealth. He showers her with extravagant gifts, essentially burying her in material value until he successfully brings her back to his palace.
He treats her acquisition the exact same way he would treat hunting a rare animal or, say, annexing a neighboring territory.
Just a business deal.
It's a transaction. He sees an object of aesthetic value, and he applies sufficient material leverage to relocate that object into his personal domain.
I keep picturing a modern-day tech billionaire trying to solve a deep-seated emotional void.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. You know the type. They feel a spark of something, maybe a profound emptiness, maybe a fleeting infatuation. And instead of doing the incredibly difficult internal work of understanding why they feel that way, they just try to buy the most expensive solution available.
Throwing money at the problem.
Exactly. The king operates on the assumption that his authority and his checkbook can seamlessly purchase an emotional bond. He just keeps throwing resources at the situation until the physical geography changes and she is locked inside his palace.
But the physical relocation is the trap.
How so?
The moment he successfully imports her into his world of total material control, the entire system breaks down. The environment he controls cannot sustain the thing he has captured.
And the breakdown is immediate. Not long after she is brought to the palace, the servant girl falls ill.
And this isn't a minor cold.
No, we aren't talking about a mild fever or a passing fatigue. She is severely, existentially unwell. Now, the king reacts exactly how you would expect a man of his stature to react when his property is damaged.
He calls in the experts.
He summons the absolute best of the best. He brings in skilled physicians from all around the region to heal her. And these doctors, they arrive with immense confidence. The text notes that they promise to cure her using their expertise.
We need to look at the epistemology of those physicians. What is the nature of their expertise?
Right, what are they actually good at?
They are masters of the physical domain. They understand herbs, they understand humors, they understand the mechanical functioning of the biological organism.
Yeah.
But the turning point of this early narrative is contained in a very specific phrase. Despite their efforts, her condition worsened.
It doesn't just stay the same. Their interventions actively accelerate her decline.
Precisely. Because their expertise is fundamentally misaligned with the reality of her affliction. This establishes the absolute boundary of earthly power that we were talking about earlier.
The wall he hits.
Yeah, exactly. The king's limitless wealth can purchase the time and labor of these highly technical experts, but all of their physical remedies are laughably useless against an ailment that does not originate in the physical body.
They're essentially trying to fix a software virus by aggressively scrubbing the computer monitor.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
Right. They are applying massive amounts of effort to the wrong layer of reality.
The physicians operate on the deeply ingrained assumption that because she has a physical body exhibiting physical symptoms, she must have a physical ailment. They are blind to anything beyond their textbooks and their potions. Expertise in the material world does not automatically grant you access to, let alone mastery over, the human soul.
Let's actually dig into the poetry here, because the translation provided by Dr. Amani and Dr. Nozin captures this frustration perfectly. The text says, "Whatever they tried, remedies and cures in vain, her illness only worsened. Hope was turned to pain."
Hope was turned to pain. It's a brilliant distillation of the counterproductive nature of their efforts.
It really is.
The very interventions that were supposed to bring relief are amplifying the suffering. And then the poetry moves into a physical description of the deterioration, which is incredibly evocative.
The imagery in the next two lines is just devastating. It reads, "The poor maiden grew as frail as a strand of hair, while the king's eyes wept blood like a flowing river there."
This juxtaposition forces us to visualize suffering in two entirely different dimensions. Let's unpack the first image, frail as a strand of hair.
Yeah, that's so vivid.
It's a depiction of almost total physical evaporation. She is wasting away, losing her mass, her substance, her very presence in the material world. She is becoming a ghost while still alive.
She is literally disappearing from the domain that the king controls.
Exactly.
And then you contrast that with the king's reaction. He is definitely not fading. He is intensely, almost violently present in his suffering. His eyes are just shedding tears. They wept blood like a flowing river.
We have to look at the psychological mechanics of that specific imagery. The text deliberately contrasts her quiet, passive physical wasting with his loud, violent, and highly visible emotional agony.
Weeping blood is intense.
It signifies a traumatic internal rupture. The king is a man who has never been denied a single desire in his life. His ego is constructed entirely around his ability to command outcomes.
Right, he always gets his way.
Now he is forced into the role of a passive spectator. He has to sit there and watch the one thing he supposedly loves vanish right in front of him, and his master key is completely useless. The door is locked from the inside.
The realization of that powerlessness has to be crushing. Every single conventional avenue has been exhausted. He bought the girl, he bought the best doctors, he bought the most expensive remedies, and the result is a girl as thin as hair and his own face covered in blood.
Total failure.
Total systemic failure. And this is what forces the narrative into its next major phase. The material world has to thoroughly exhaust itself before the king is willing to look elsewhere.
Because surrender is not a natural state for an autocrat.
Definitely not.
Up until this exact moment, Every single one of his actions has been an act of imposition. He imposed his wealth to extract the girl from the forest. He imposed his physicians onto her sickbed. He imposed his will on the environment.
Yeah.
It is only when the failure is absolute that the imposition stops and the yielding begins.
So the king, having completely exhausted his earthly toolkit, finally turns to a higher power. He seeks divine help. The text is very specific about his demeanor here. It says he prays earnestly and wholeheartedly.
A total shift in posture.
He is so deeply immersed in this state of desperate supplication that he actually falls asleep right there in the middle of his prayer. And while he's asleep, he experiences a profound dream. He sees a wise old man who makes him a very clear, unambiguous promise. A skilled healer will come to you tomorrow.
This marks a complete paradigm shift in the king's operating system.
But I need to push back on this sequence of events, or at least play the skeptic for a minute.
Okay, go for it.
If we accept the premise that the king's power is useless and divine intervention is required, why did he have to go through the entire agonizing process with the conventional doctors first?
That's a fair question.
Right. Why did he have to spend all that money, watch her waste away to a strand of hair, and reach a point of weeping actual blood before he just asked for the right kind of help? Why couldn't he just start with the earnest prayer?
Because you cannot fill a cup that is already overflowing with its own self-importance.
Okay.
The failure of the physicians wasn't just a plot device, it was a psychological prerequisite for the king's spiritual awakening, however brief or flawed that awakening might be.
So, we essentially have to do things the hard way. Humans only ever seek root-level, profound answers when our superficial, easy tools spectacularly fail us.
It is a fundamental reality of human nature, especially for those insulated by power. Think about it. If the very first physician had walked in, handed the servant girl a basic herbal tea, and she woke up the next morning completely cured, what would the king have learned?
Nothing, probably.
He would have simply reinforced his existing cognitive bias. He would have told himself, see, my wealth purchased the right doctor who provided the right tea, therefore my power remains absolute.
Okay.
The ego has to be systematically dismantled before it can ask for genuine transformative help. The illness wasn't just afflicting the girl, it was dismantling the king's illusion of control.
That makes the dream state incredibly significant then, because he can only receive this message when his conscious, controlling mind is literally turned off. He falls asleep in his desperation.
We have to contrast the waking world and the dream world within the architecture of this story.
Right.
In the waking world, the king was surrounded by arrogant physicians who loudly made bold promises they absolutely could not keep, relying entirely on their material expertise. But look at the dream.
The wise old man.
Yes, the dream features a wise old man. There is no arrogance. There is no boasting of credentials. There is just a quiet, absolute certainty. A skilled healer will come to you tomorrow.
The energy is entirely different. The doctors were frantic and imposing. The old man is calm and receptive.
It represents a shift from relying on external material intervention to opening oneself up to internal spiritual insight. The dream space in Sufi literature often represents a connection to a deeper, more fundamental layer of reality.
A layer he ignored.
A layer that the king had been completely deaf to while he was busy hunting, acquiring, and commanding.
And true to the old man's word, the very next day, the promised healer arrives at the palace. The true healer steps onto the scene, and immediately, his methodology is a stark departure from everything the king has tried so far.
He fundamentally alters the diagnostic framework.
Exactly. When this new healer walks in, he isn't carrying a bag full of rare, expensive herbs or complex medical instruments. Yeah. He brings an entirely different diagnostic tool to the bedside. The text explicitly refers to it as his insight.
Insight. The word itself is instructive. Insight. The ability to look inward, past the physical presentation, and see the underlying reality.
So the healer begins his examination of the servant girl. Remember, the previous doctors were obsessing over her physical symptoms, her paleness, her frailness, her lack of appetite.
Treating the surface.
Right. But this healer applies his insight, and he deduces something revolutionary for the context of this story. He realizes that her illness is not physical in origin at all. It is entirely psychosomatic.
Massive revelation.
The root cause of her wasting away is unfulfilled love.
This is the moment the narrative elevates from a straightforward morality tale into a highly sophisticated psychological observation.
It really is, because he doesn't just offer a vague diagnosis of, she is lovesick, and leave it at that. His insight is razor sharp. He pinpoints the exact, specific target of her affection.
He finds the specific root.
He reveals to the king that the servant girl is deeply, desperately in love with a young goldsmith who lives far away in the city of Samarkand.
To fully appreciate this moment, we have to look at the dynamic of treating a root cause versus treating a symptom.
Right, the core theme here.
This dynamic is the central pivot of the entire narrative. The first group of highly paid doctors failed so miserably because they were exclusively treating symptoms. They saw a frail, starving body and tried to introduce physical nourishment or physical medicine.
And it just made it worse.
Because they were completely blind to the mind-body connection. The healer, however, recognizes that this intense emotional starvation, this unfulfilled, desperate longing for the goldsmith in Samarkand, is literally cannibalizing her physical form. She is frail as a strand of hair because her psyche is starving, not her stomach.
He diagnoses the invisible architecture of her suffering. He sees the emotion that is eating her alive.
And because the diagnosis operates on a completely different plane of reality, the prescription must also operate on that same plane. You cannot cure an invisible emotional starvation with a physical pill.
And here is where the story gets deeply uncomfortable and, honestly, incredibly fascinating. Because the healer's prescription is wild.
It really pushes boundaries.
It borders on offensive to the king's pride. To cure the servant girl, the healer tells the king that he must bring her actual lover, this goldsmith from Samarkand, to the palace. I want you to just pause and imagine the sheer scale of the ego death required by the king in this moment.
It is an engineered, massive humiliation for an absolute monarch.
Seriously, put yourself in his shoes. You are the king. You saw this girl. You desired her. You utilized your vast wealth to purchase her and bring her to your fortress. You want her to love you. And now, the divine healer you prayed so desperately for turns around and says, the only way to save her life is to invite your romantic rival, a common tradesman, a goldsmith, into your own home, into your own palace, and hand the girl over to him. It is the ultimate stress test.
It forces a difficult question.
Does the king actually care about the well-being and survival of this girl, or does he merely want to possess her as an object?
It forces the king to actively participate in the dismantling of his own desire. He has to weaponize his wealth and power, not to secure his own gratification, but to facilitate hers. It is a profound inversion of his normal operating procedure.
But as we quickly discover, we shouldn't give the king too much credit for altruism just yet.
Right, there's a twist.
The healer isn't just handing out relationship advice, he is executing a highly complex, multi-layered plan. And while the king's ego takes a massive hit in the short term by inviting the rival in, the king is actually given a darker, hidden motive by the healer.
A secondary objective.
He has instructions that go far beyond just hosting a wedding, which forces us to critically examine the character of the goldsmith himself.
The ethical landscape of the story becomes incredibly treacherous here. We have to analyze the goldsmith not just as a victim of circumstance, but as an active, complicit participant in his own downfall.
So let's look at the mechanics of his arrival. The king, acting strictly on the healer's advice, orders his men to summon the young goldsmith from Samarkand. But the text does not mince words regarding the goldsmith's character.
No, it's very blunt.
It explicitly and immediately describes him as greedy. The king doesn't just send a polite royal summons or a military escort, he sends vast amounts of wealth. He uses material gifts as bait to lure the goldsmith to the palace.
The mirroring taking place in this sequence is essential to the philosophical argument.
It is impossible to miss. Just as the king initially operated under the delusion that he could buy the servant girl's genuine affection with material gifts, he now utilizes those exact same material levers to purchase the goldsmith.
And the tragedy, or perhaps the poetic justice, depending on how you view it, is that the goldsmith is perfectly susceptible to the exact same materialistic trap that the king naturally operates within.
He falls right into it.
He has a fatal flaw, and the king exploits it flawlessly.
I want to spend some time on the poetry for this specific moment, because the lines describing the goldsmith's reaction are chillingly revealing. Dr. Amani and Dr. Nosen provide this stanza. When the man beheld such wealth and gifts in store, he was beguiled and left his town and children for more.
We need to analyze that word, beguiled.
Such a specific word.
It implies a state of being charmed or enchanted, but usually in a deceptive, highly manipulative way. He is placed under a spell.
He is completely hypnotized by the stuff, by the sheer volume of gold and treasure, which carries this dark, heavy irony considering his profession.
Right. He's a goldsmith.
He works with this metal every single day. You would think, of all people, he would understand its mundane physical nature and be somewhat immune to its allure. But instead, he's the most vulnerable to it.
Yeah.
And then we hit that brutal realization at the end of the line. He left his town and children for more. He actively chooses to abandon his own flesh and blood, his own offspring, purely for the promise of increased personal wealth.
This is where the narrative is carefully establishing a moral justification for what is about to occur. The text is deliberately exposing the goldsmith's deeply compromised nature.
He's not a good guy.
The servant girl is starving herself to death over her love for this man, but her love is based entirely on his external presentation, his physical beauty and charm. The text reveals that this beautiful exterior completely masks a profoundly ugly, mercenary, internal reality.
A dark contrast.
He is a man who calculates the value of his own children and decides that the king's gold is worth more.
And that detail, the conscious abandonment of his family for cash, is the crucial pivot point for the massive tone shift that hits us in the very next lines. The poem continues, "Glad and joyous, the young man set upon the way, unaware that the king meant to end his days."
The juxtaposition there is engineered to induce whiplash in the reader. Glad and joyous pressed directly up against meant to end his days.
It is incredibly dark. I mean, think about the cognitive dissonance you experience as a reader here. You start this section thinking you are reading a story of a brilliant, divinely inspired healer executing a complex psychological intervention to cure a lovesick girl.
Right.
And suddenly, in the space of 2 lines of poetry, you realize you're actually reading the blueprints of a premeditated assassination plot.
It's a shocking reveal.
This is no longer just a medical procedure. It is a murder being orchestrated under the guise of a cure. The king is actively luring this greedy man to his execution.
And the goldsmith's fatal flaw renders him entirely oblivious to the danger. His overwhelming greed has blinded him not only to his fundamental moral obligations as a father, but it has completely short-circuited his basic survival instincts.
He doesn't suspect a thing.
He is a man walking through a dark forest. He sees a shiny piece of gold inside a steel cage, and he walks right in without ever looking at the bars.
So the narrative propels forward into the trap. The goldsmith arrives at the royal palace, grinning from ear to ear, completely unaware of his impending doom. He thinks he has just won the lottery.
He thinks he's set for life.
He believes he's going to collect his mountain of wealth, marry the beautiful girl, and live out a life of absolute luxury. He steps willingly, eagerly, right into the center of the healer's ultimate design. Which brings us to the climax of the story, and honestly, the most ethically unsettling and philosophically demanding part of this entire deep dive, the systematic deconstruction of superficial love.
This is the crucible. This is where the story's argument regarding the fragility of the material world reaches its absolute peak.
Let's lay out the mechanics of this climax. The goldsmith has arrived, and following the healer's specific instructions, the king actually permits the servant girl and the goldsmith to be married. They tie the knot right there in the palace. And the text makes a very specific point to tell us that they live happily together for 6 months. 6 whole months of uninterrupted marital bliss.
We cannot gloss over that timeline. Why 6 months? Why not spring the trap immediately?
Right, why wait?
The healer is operating with terrifying precision. He understands that to destroy an illusion permanently, you cannot just attack it while it is an unfulfilled fantasy. You have to let the illusion fully realize itself in the physical world.
Wow.
He lets the servant girl have exactly what she wanted. He allows her to gorge herself on the physical presence of the object of her desire, making it completely real to her senses.
He lets her build her entire house on a foundation of sand, just so she can feel the full weight of the collapse. Because after those 6 months of happiness, the twist arrives. Following what the text describes as divine prompting, the healer finally makes his move.
The turning point.
He administers the medicine to the goldsmith. But this is not a medicine designed to heal or preserve life. It is a poison. It is a highly specific concoction that initiates a slow, irreversible decline in the young man's health.
And this is where we have to pause and deeply interrogate the text.
We absolutely must, because I cannot just let this slide without a major debate. Look at what is actually happening. We have a healer, a man explicitly promised to the king in a divinely inspired dream. He is supposedly operating under divine prompting.
Right.
And what is his divinely inspired action? He is actively, intentionally, and slowly poisoning a human being to death. How do we reconcile this extreme moral ambiguity?
It forces a shocking disruption of our conventional modern expectations regarding the divine, and certainly regarding the medical profession. In our framework, a healer's absolute mandate is the preservation of life.
To do no harm.
Exactly. To actively extinguish it is the ultimate violation, but we have to analyze this within the Sufi philosophical framework the Masnavi operates within.
Okay, walk me through that framework, because right now it just looks like a divinely sanctioned hit job.
In this tradition, the ultimate goal of the soul is union with the divine, with ultimate truth. Anything that prevents that union, any illusion, any false attachment, any idol we worship instead of the truth, is a disease of the soul. The servant girl's absolute life-destroying obsession with the physical form of the goldsmith is an idol. It is a false reality. The healer, acting as an agent of ultimate truth, recognizes that this deeply entrenched destructive illusion cannot simply be argued away.
You can't just talk her out of it.
You cannot logic someone out of an obsession. Sometimes the only way to break the idol is to let the person hold it and then introduce the catalyst that forces the idol to rot in their hands. The death of the goldsmith is the annihilation of the false self and the false object of desire, clearing the path for the apprehension of actual truth.
It's an incredibly harsh, almost terrifying metaphor. It suggests that sometimes the cure for our deepest illusions requires the violent destruction of the things we incorrectly believe will save us.
It's a bitter pill.
And the mechanics of this destruction are fascinating.
Right.
Because it's not a swift execution. The text specifies it causes a slow decline. And what is a primary targeted symptom of this poisoned medicine? It specifically attacks his physical appearance. The text explicitly states that as a result of the medicine, the goldsmith's beauty and charm began to fade.
This is a highly targeted strike. It attacks the specific pillar that supports the servant girl's devotion.
Right. He loses his looks, he grows pale, weak, and physically undesirable. He loses the very attributes, the outward hue, that the servant girl was so desperately, fatally in love with.
And we must observe the consequence with clinical detachment, just as the text does. The narrative tells us that as his physical beauty evaporated, he completely lost all appeal in the eyes of the servant girl.
Let's examine those final poetic lines from Dr. Amani and Dr. Nosen's adaptation, because they hammer this terrifying psychological reality home flawlessly. When his beauty faded and he grew pale, little by little, her love began to fail.
It is a brutal, unsparing observation of the mechanics of superficial attachment. The healer's objective wasn't merely the physical assassination of the goldsmith.
What was it then?
His objective was the assassination of the illusion of the goldsmith within the mind of the girl. By slowly, methodically dissolving the outward beauty, the healer exposed the incredibly shallow, fragile foundation upon which the servant girl's entire emotional universe was built.
It's like an optical illusion. You look at it from one specific angle, and your brain is convinced it sees a profound three-dimensional structure. But the moment the angle shifts, the moment the beauty fades, your brain can no longer process the image.
It just disappears.
The structure vanishes, and you are left staring at flat, meaningless lines on a page. The love didn't just lessen, it fundamentally ceased to exist because the object it was attached to was no longer recognizable.
Precisely. This is the crucial diagnostic proof. If her love had been genuine, if it had been rooted in a recognition of his soul or a connection to his character, his physical decline and suffering would have elicited immense compassion and care.
She would have taken care of him.
It would have drawn her closer, much like the king weeping rivers of blood when she was ill. But because her love was entirely conditional, entirely dependent on his aesthetic charm and beauty, the emotion simply evaporated the moment the aesthetic appeal vanished. Little by little, her love began to fail.
It reveals that there was absolutely nothing underneath. She didn't love a person, she loved an image. And when the image distorted, the love died. Which brings us to the final concluding thesis statement of the entire narrative provided in the translation. Loves that are for the sake of outward hue are not true love, they bring disgrace in view.
That specific phrase, loves of outward hue, is the master key that actually does unlock this entire story.
Oh, that's a great point.
It is the perfect encapsulation of the fatal flaw operating within every single major character in this narrative. It synthesizes the entire psychological journey we've just tracked.
Explain how that flaw manifests across the board. Connect the dots for us.
We have to track the chain of failures. It begins with the apex of power, the king. His initial love for the servant girl was entirely, fundamentally, a love of outward hue.
Yeah.
He saw a beautiful, aesthetically pleasing girl while he was out hunting, and he immediately utilized his vast material wealth to purchase her. He had no knowledge of her mind, her soul, or her character. He simply desired to possess her physical form.
He loved the outward hue of her youth and beauty.
Exactly. Then we move down the chain to the servant girl. Her love for the goldsmith was similarly purely a love of outward hue. She was so completely obsessed with his physical, external beauty that the absence of it literally drove her to the brink of physical starvation.